So in the shop today, we got ourselves a 1949 MG TC EXU car. Now, if you've never heard of an EXU car, stick around. I'll let you know what I know about them. So what exactly is a TC EXU car? Well, it was MG's first attempt at producing a car specifically for the US market and meeting US regulations, hence the designation EXU. Now, they built something a little less than 500 total of these cars, and they had a bunch of parts on them that were very specific to just those cars. So one of the most recognizable features of an EXU car is actually parts that are missing from this car. They originally were shipped with front and rear bumpers from the factory. And ironically, while a lot of EXU owners ended up taking the bumpers off because they didn't like the looks out of them, there was also companies in the aftermarket making bumpers for these cars, so people with non-EXU cars were putting bumpers on. But at any rate, if you have an EXU car and you're missing the bumpers, they can be a little difficult to find, and you need to do your research to make sure you're getting the actual factory bumpers and not one of those aftermarket ones. One of the other little quick ways of recognizing it is the normal TC had a round chrome horn that was clamped onto the badge bar right here. These did not have the horns there. What they had was the dual wind tone horns under the bonnet on either side of the firewall, just like the TD, which they were carried over to the TD. And originally, all your TCs had believe a fog light here. These didn't come with any lights, so if you see any lights like this was added on by the owners at some point in time. Also, they went to 7-inch sealed beam headlights for the US market to meet the regulations, which was also then carried over to the TD. In order to sell these in the US, they had to have turn signals on them, so these lights were swapped out to have dual filament bulbs in them and added turn signals, as well as some added lights on the back that we'll show you later. And they ended up with safety glass. So they were laminated safety glass in the windshield instead of the tempered glass that all the other TCs had, plus a scuttle-mounted rearview mirror. So while we're still at the front of the car, got the bonnet open here, and you can see the horn here and how they were mounted on both sides of the battery box. And now all the EXU cars would have had EXU right here at the end of the chassis number. And as I said before, we had the rear view mirror here on the scuttle that was standard on just the EXU cars. There wasn't one here on the standard TC. But now the dashboard was also a little bit different. Now this one is not 100% as original. This would have originally been gold, but this whole center panel is different because they added a turn signal switch to it here, and they changed the position of some of the switches and gauges, and the 30-mile-an-hour light was swapped out, or I think it was actually on this side, with a second map light. And then some of these switches were changed because of, they added a high beam warning light and stuff to it. But also, this is not the original steering wheel. This is a Brooklands wheel. Originally, it would have had solid spoke, I think 3-spoke wheel, that was actually a pearlescent gold. Those things are pretty hard to find anymore. They're really rare because the bake light that it was made out of did not survive usually very well. So a lot of times you see them, they're in really bad condition. Now this isn't the first EXU car I've ever had in my shop. The last one actually still had all its bumpers, the original steering wheel and everything on it, and that steering wheel was in pretty rough shape, even though it had been stored in a barn for like 50 years. So now on the standard TC, you did have this D light like this that was used as a running light, brake light, and would light up the license plate. But the EXU cars did not have these. This has been retrofitted back on to look more like a standard TC. What they did have is they had lights up here. These were used with dual filament bulbs. I'm not 100% sure these are the actual proper ones because the last one I worked on had completely different lights on it, and I'm not sure which one's the actual correct one. But they were dual filament lights that were used as turn signals and brake lights. Now this car has had this aftermarket setup put on there, which is a third brake light, and the turn signal is up here for better visibility, which is a really common thing to do on T-Series cars. But the bumper would have been a MG plinth right here that was set it off from the aftermarket stuff. Now the aftermarket, from my understanding, had those. So the gentleman that owns this car, you've actually seen on this channel before if you've been watching. We actually interviewed him a little bit about his TC special, or boat tail special. But this was his first MG. He bought this thing, I believe, in 1972 and restored it himself sometime back in the 70s. But parts and information was so difficult back then that after meeting up with a few other T-Series owners, they ended up forming our local club, the Central Ohio MG Owners. So the reason why we have this thing in the shop is it hasn't run in like 5 years. Somewhere roughly 6 years ago or so, he put a new wiring harness in this thing himself, but there's a bunch of extra wiring because he's got, you know, spotlight, radio, and a couple other things. And he had a wire burn up in the car and it quit running. And since he's in his 90s, he really can't get underneath the dash anymore. This is his wife's favorite car of all the cars they own because it's their original car, and she spent the most time in this. And she's wondering why it's not running, and he's been 5 years intending to work on it, but never really getting around to it because of various health issues between either her or him and the fact that he can't bend and twist anymore like he used to. So he finally decided it was time. Brought it up to me, see if you can get this thing running for us. So we will be doing another video later on getting this thing actually up and running and trying to figure out what the wiring problem actually is.